unexpectedly in March thanks to a drop in petrol prices, but the Conservatives are warning it doesn't include April's bill increases or a rise in the minimum wage and national insurance. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed up 26 points at 82.75. The pound buys $1.32 and €1.16. LBC weather, patchy rain for most tonight, but generally dry in the south and a low of -1. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Ever heard of Biobank? No, me neither. It's set up to enable scientific discoveries that improve human health. Why should that affect you? Because very likely much of your NHS data is held by Biobank, and now Chinese, supposedly, health researchers and scientists, but I think we know with China, wouldn't just be them, have access now to your NHS data. Sir Richard Dearlove. Now, Sir Richard was head of the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6.
What I don't understand is why we get ourselves again and again into this situation by allowing Chinese companies into, strategic aspects of the nation's life. Why on earth do we do it?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC. This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Well, that was quite an hour, wasn't it? I'm sure we're going to have quite an hour over the next hour with our Wednesday Cross Question. In the studio with us, we have two newbies on the programme. We have Dr Al Pinkerton, Liberal Democrat MP for Surrey Heath. He beat Michael Gove, by the way. He's the party... No, he didn't. Did Michael Gove... Michael Gove didn't stand, but that was his constituency.
He denied me that privilege.
But you would have done it anyway, wouldn't you? He's the party's Northern Ireland spokesperson. Max Anderson, he's head of communications for the Conservative Environment Network campaign group. Scarlett MccGwire is a political commentator, former communications consultant to the Labour Party, and Angela Knight, former Conservative MP and Treasury Minister, also used to run Energy UK and the British Bankers Association. So they're here to take your calls, 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number, you can text 84850, and of course you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to a text question first of all from Scott in West Hampstead. Is the Supreme Court's pronouncement that the definition of a woman is based upon biological sex a victory for common sense, or does that belief held by some politicians, legal experts and transgender groups mean that the Supreme Court pronouncement is not the end of the matter? Now you're all saying, please don't come to me first. I've got to come to someone first, haven't I, Scarlett MccGwire?
I thought it would be me. I think that we have to accept the rule of law. We have to accept that what the Supreme Court says is the end of it. This cannot go on. But what was very important was that the rider that Lord Justice Hodge said was that this doesn't mean the vilification of trans groups. Is that on the one hand, he says, if a woman is biologically a woman, and therefore things like women-only spaces under the Equality Act. This is quite important because it's all legal, is theirs. But that doesn't mean that trans people don't exist, as some people like to say. And I think actually, frankly, for the vast majority of people in Britain, we want the polarities to go away. We're quite happy to have trans men and trans women, and we all just want to live our lives instead of having these terrible, terrible fights.
Al.
Gosh, well, I think Scarlett spoke so beautifully and really captured the way I feel about it as well. I mean, I watched the unveiling of this judgment this morning, and I think one of the things that struck me about Lord Hodge's words was, even in this piece of oratory that was meant to be fairly easy to understand, it was still so complex, even what he read out. I mean, I do agree with Scarlett, though. I do not complain about campaigning judges, and I absolutely accept the verdict. And in many ways, it does bring a clarity to what has been a hugely turbulent debate and a deeply contested debate.
But it gives your party a problem, doesn't it? Because you've been unequivocally on the... I mean, if we're going to have sides of an argument, on the trans side, and people have been expelled from the Liberal Democrats for the heresy of supporting a gender-critical viewpoint.
Yeah, and the Lib Dems certainly have been hugely supportive of the trans community, and it has taken a court case like this to clarify this particular point of law. I mean, this is really about the interaction of the Gender Recognition Act and the Equalities Act. So, as Scarlett says, this does not deny the existence of trans people at all. The Gender Recognition Act still stands. You can still transition to become a woman. What this court case is about, it's about you are not protected as a trans person, as a woman, under the Equalities Act, but you can still transition to become a woman under the Gender Recognition Act, from what I understand.
Do you think that your party will be campaigning to change the law on this?
Well, I think the first thing that has to happen is that this is like pulling on a thread, and a whole series of things are now going to become undone as a consequence of this. We were hearing from Joanna Cherry before about, for example, changing policy on single-sex wards in hospitals. So a whole series of things are going to have to be rewritten now, and the government will have to be rewriting those.
Do you think they should have to be?
Well, I think this court case requires them.
Well, I know, but that's not what I asked. I mean, do you think, either individually or as a Liberal Democrat, do you think that the current state of play should persist, and that therefore, if you think that, then there has to be a change in the law?
Well, as I say, the Gender Recognition Act remains. Trans people can still transition to become women. This is about the Equalities Act not protecting those trans people as women. I haven't given a great deal of thought to how or if that could be changed. Presumably it could. Somebody could bring a new bill to Parliament. But I think what's going to happen certainly is over the next weeks and months, the government are going to have to bring either legislation or they will have to be rewriting policy. So I think for sure trans people, that 0.5% of the population, are going to be in the eye of the media again, even though they don't particularly want to be, as these rewritings of policy play through the system.
You've been an MP for 10 months now. How many pieces of correspondence have you had from constituents on this issue?
I've had quite a bit. Certainly not as much as special educational needs, not as much as housing.
No, but the fact you've had any, I think, is interesting.
I certainly have had correspondence about it, yeah. But particularly, as Scarlett says, particularly from the polls and the campaigning groups who are at the polls of this debate. And I think if one thing could happen as a consequence of this, that thread has been pulled. Things will undoubtedly have to be discussed and debated. But what I truly hope is that over the next weeks and months, that we can have that conversation in a calm way that brings more light than heat and that enhances human dignity rather than further erodes it.
Angela.
Well, not too much to add, actually. I heard the judgment as well, and a couple of things I was quite impressed about. The first was that it was unanimous, and these sorts of cases are not necessarily unanimous. You've got a group of judges, and quite often they express some different views. So I think that's important that it was unanimous. And the second was that in delivering the part of the verdict that I heard, there was the statement that this isn't about winners and losers or rights and wrongs. It's about a clarification of a piece of legislation, which I always understood what that was the intention of that legislation when it went through. The problem with the debate is it's got toxic. Campaigning groups, there's lots of campaigning groups about lots of things, but they have caused a temperature which has resulted in this topic not easily being discussed in a sensible and reasoned manner. I think you asked at the start, Ian, whether this was, or the person who texted, the listener who texted it, asked the question, is this an end of it? And the answer to that is, certainly from a legal perspective, I hope so. But I think that there will need some clarification as to whether law is required to clarify or whether it's just policies and common sense. I don't know. Again, I would hope policies and common sense prevails.
Andrew on a text says, why are you making such a big deal about such a small problem? Well, when it's leading the news, I think it's understandable that we cover it on this programme. Max Anderson, as a head of communications for the Conservative Environment Network, I don't know how much thought you give to this particular subject, but I think one of the interesting things is that, of course, in this country, the Supreme Court decision, that's not necessarily the end of the matter. Parliament can have the final say.
No, you're completely right. And I think, actually, I'm going to be rather boring and agree with a lot of people here in terms of my sentiments. I think what this does is it adds a lot of clarity, which I think is a fantastic thing moving forward. And what I really hope is it does take a lot of the toxicity out of this debate, because we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to move anywhere forward if we keep having really toxic, really top-line discussions. And as a comms person, that might be the exact opposite of what I should be saying. But yeah, I hope that this is not the end of the road. When we look at sports, when we look at safe spaces, this is going to be a long and difficult discussion going forward, but I hope it does provide the clarity and the basis to move off. I think particularly for MPs who are going to have some difficult questions, this might make it a bit easier for you to actually go on radio and answer these questions. And yes, it might enter Parliament a bit more, and whether or not we need to change the law. But I think for the moment, all parties will want to kind of sit with the legal decision.
Kemi Badenoch has welcomed this decision, and she's been quite open in her gender-critical views on this. Do you think a future Conservative government is likely to want to legislate to maybe restrict trans rights in any way?
Yeah, I really hope so. They don't. I think they've welcomed the decision, and I think this is as far as it should go. There's also been quite a lot of discussion and a lot of Conservative MPs asking the government to act fast and quite aggressively in some senses, I think, which for me is a little bit worrying. I think we still need to take time discussing this. We can't be rash, and we need to take the toxicity and the heat out of it. And as everyone says here, this hopefully provides the clarity to move on in the right direction.
And it's up to all politicians and Parliament itself. They've got a huge part to play in now cooling things down. And I would hope that they're going to take that responsibility, because I do think that they've got a very strong responsibility in this area. Where I suspect it will play out for a bit is that whole area of sport, because that has caused some problems, with women swimming, of course, we saw that in the US, running, other sports. There is a question there where some sports groups have taken one view and other sports groups have taken another. So I can see it sort of playing out there. But if the political class in this country, for want of a better expression, actually now says, right, that's it, a decision has been made on the law, we're now going to play it cool, I think that is probably the best act that they can take.
And I was actually going to say as well, 100%, because as the court has said today, no one should see this as a win, no one should see this as a triumph. And I think the worry is that some politicians might see this as a win for their side. I don't think that's how we should see it 100%. Let's take the
But if you looked at the scenes outside the Supreme Court and indeed in Edinburgh, there was quite a lot of jubilation going on there.
Well, there was, yes.
Chris says on a text, let me help the Lib Dem MP. You know that this text is not going to be helpful, don't you? I voted for them at the last election in Brecon. They just won. If he can't answer this, then I won't again, as he's delusional, as the law has been defined and women have gained their hard-earned rights from the Supreme Court. I'm not quite sure what you're supposed to answer there, but...
Well, there doesn't seem to be a question. I have to confess that I didn't pick up on the question anyway, but I think it might be because I repeated the fact that the Gender Recognition Act of 2004 remains intact and I think unchanged actually by this court decision. As I say, this court decision was very much about the Equal Opportunities Act. But trans people still can transition to become women. They can still get their gender recognition certificates and they can have their birth certificates changed as a consequence of that. So that remains unchanged.
Right, we'll move on to other subjects in just a few moments' time. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 8:15.
LB
coffee.
Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on Global Player. This is LBC.
16 minutes past 8. Lib Dem MP Dr Al Pinkerton is with us. Angela Knight, former Conservative MP, Scarlett MccGwire, political commentator, and Max Anderson from the Conservative Environment Network, which I suppose does what it says on the tin.
Literally what it says on the tin. Let's get to net zero in a Conservative way, and we have a load of MPs who support us.
And do you support the change in policy from Kemi Badenoch? Because she's been quite sceptical about that.
Yeah, I think it was disappointing that she preempted her policy reviews. I think it's right that we look at how we approach the environment and approach climate technologies. I think she's right in that. But I think she was a bit disappointing jumping the gun on saying we're not by 2050. Maybe after the policy review.
It's called leadership, isn't it?
It's called leadership, but I think she wanted to take her time with reviewing the process of what we've done before and what we're going to do going forward. And announcing such a big decision so quickly before that is, I thought jumping the gun a little bit.
OK, well, if you want to ask about that, you have 45 minutes to do so. 0345 6060 973. Andrew in Fulham says, today inflation for March fell to 2.6%. And Rachel Reeves said this proved her plan was working. If it now starts to rise, as economists predict, does that show her plan isn't working and that she's actually being disingenuous with the British people and she should step aside? Well, that's quite a radical thing to say towards the end of that question there. Angela, you've been a Treasury Minister. How do you view these things?
Don't jump on statistics is actually the answer. And I think she will regret having done that because, as you rightly say, there's a whole load of pressures coming through the system and they're going to result in an increase again in inflation, and then she'll have to do something. So to have picked on one figure and said, eureka, my policies are working, has just opened her up to accusations right across the piece. We are not going to be out of economic difficulties for some considerable time, and never underestimate the Trump versus China debate to really foul things up for the rest of us. Because whilst, we may on the one hand say, well, we'll bit out on the side from that, on the other, our two big exports to the US are 25% on special cars, and the second one is pharmaceuticals, which is now right in the frame. So we're not in 10%, we're actually at a higher tariff rate if this daft policy of Trump proceeds. And frankly, if you're going to put up a situation in which you've got Trump versus China, China is not a democracy. The reality of that is that China will actually just stick it out longer than him. We're in the middle of a global complete dislocation, 1 month and one small reduction in inflation. Well, you shouldn't say no to it, but you need to be very, very careful what you say about it, and even much more careful about what the future looks like.
Al?
Oh, gosh, well, I feel like it's history repeating itself. Angela has given a really excellent answer.
The coalition rebuilt.
I mean, today's inflation, of course, you have to be grateful when inflation falls. It seemed to be mostly because of falling petrol prices. So it was a fairly limited part of the economy that seemed to be pulling inflation down. But I completely agree. She's now a hostage to fortune because we know that there are inflationary pressures in the system. We know that the increasing costs of employment are going to be coming through within the next couple of months. That will drive inflation up. We have the emergent tariff war. That's also going to drive prices up. 10%. Pretty much universal tariff is going to drive up prices in the US, and that's going to have a cascading effect through the economy. So yeah, she's pinned her political colours to this particular mast, but that mast is not always going to be set in the direction that she is going to be comfortable with, I don't think, over coming months. So it was a strange decision, but it's one that she's stated. So let's just see how it plays out.
Max Anderson.
I think it's difficult to be praising inflation while at the same time you're nationalising major industries. I think it's going to only probably get worse when you got someone in America who is changing his mind every 50 seconds that we rely so much upon. I think it's very reckless to be coming out so strongly to say that the economy is moving in the right direction when probably it will only get worse this year. So yeah, I think it's not a great decision from her.
Is this a sort of, you're a communications consultant, Scarlett. Is this a communications error?
Well, it certainly is, isn't it? I I do agree with all those three. I was, because the first thing Rachel said is this isn't good enough, but it's getting better. And I thought, oh, that's fine. And then to come and say, this shows that it's working is really difficult. And you think, who is advising her on communications? Because actually, I think we all know that what we should do is under-promise and over-deliver. And delivering the economy is incredibly difficult, and it actually has got to the stage where it's not about her and her policies as much as what is happening out there. And in Angela's list, which I completely agreed with, she did leave out the Ukraine war and what that's going to mean, and that we're going to give 3% on defence. I mean, it's going to be very, very tough. And I completely agree with Angela about China actually not being a democracy. I've always not understood when they said, well, China's economy isn't very good and they'll fail first. And you think, it doesn't matter. They'll let people starve rather than, we're waiting for people in America to actually say, hold on, we don't really like what's going on. I think Trump's approval figures are quite amazingly high for what is going on. But I mean, you don't have to have approval figures in China.
But Iain, it's also, forgive me, it's also insensitive to the way that people are actually feeling about their everyday finances. People feel stretched. They're getting their new energy bills through. They've seen council tax go up. They know what their water charges are going to be. To say that this is a success and that inflation is coming down just doesn't seem, I don't think, to correspond with people's everyday experiences of their finances. And there are things that could be done. You could help people. You could try and work hard to bring energy bills down. You could help people insulate their homes, because those charges are having a material effect on the way that people live their lives.
You're absolutely right. I think that, we always use this trite phrase, to govern is to choose, but it is. You decide what you want to do, how you're going to pay for it. And let's actually bring the next question in here, because at first sight it's totally unrelated. But I don't think it is, in a sense. It's from Rhonda, who says, is it right that David Lammy can promise £120 million to Sudan when we're constantly told we have no money in this country? Surely we can't be all things to all countries, and we should put Great Britain first, as Mr. Trump is putting America first. Now, the winter fuel cut, I think that was to raise £500 million. Well, a lot of pensioners are going to think, well, hang on a minute, £120 million going to Sudan. I don't get the priorities here. They've got the wrong priorities. And it's quite difficult to argue against that, isn't it?
What's happening in Sudan is absolutely appalling. And it's appalling in Sudan. Millions are being displaced. Thousands of people are being murdered. There is genocide going on there. But as far as Britain is concerned, they come over, people are leaving Sudan. It's why getting rid of foreign aid, or cutting foreign aid in half, was so bad, because actually what we need to do is we need a safer world. So we go on and on about immigration. We go on and on about people coming over in the boats. We know what's happening to immigration in Europe. And then you have the Horn of Africa that is in total chaos. And actually, we have to do something.
I agree with you. But the overwhelming majority of the British people do not take that view. They see these stark figures that the government is spending this amount of money on that, which is not a priority for British people. And we can agree that actually there is a priority there, because if we get things right in these countries, it won't have an impact on us, because not so many people will try to get here illegally. But that's not how the great British public see it.
I know. I'm just saying why I think that David Lammy is right. And I think he was right to try and do something about Sudan, because, as the media have woken up to in the last month or so, it was a secret war. Yeah. But because
which
it was somewhere over there.
Which we were covering in October last year, by the way.
Well done,
Yes,
Iain.
thank you. Pat on the back to our production team.
Well done, Iain, and well done your producers. But it is something that we don't talk about.
Yeah.
It is
over
there,
you are
right? And it is, what is happening is terrible.
Max.
But when we talk about it, I beg your pardon.
I was going to say as well, I do agree, but it's even more important now because we're obviously in the Trump administration cutting their foreign aid even further. I think And Iain, obviously the British public have very mixed opinions on this, but sometimes the government do have to make tough decisions and do what is right. And I think David Lammy is right to stand up and say, look, it is time to help Sudan. Also, we're talking about America kind of disappearing on its place in the world. It's ruining a lot of its relationships. And I do think the UK should, to a certain extent, take advantage of that and do what we've always done and be big advocates for democracy around the world. And I think that's only a good thing.
Angela?
Sorry, I jumped in. I do beg your pardon.
Right.
Yes, I was going to say that I agree that when you see some of these quite horrific cases, that there is a real need to try and help and assist. Where I think we perhaps don't get it entirely right is we'll do the food bit and we'll do the health bit. But if you're going to really make life different for people who live in those countries, there is something about how they run that country as well. And what we don't say, rightly or wrong, we never seem to form an opinion, which we should, on some of the rulers, because these countries that are in mess because they've been badly run.
But that's what the big conference was about, and that's unfortunately why it fell apart, was because there was disagreement about government, not about health and food.
But it is still the thing that will stop this mass, as you rightly say, transference of people east to west and south to north. They're moving. We would all move if we could, if we were stuck in some of those countries, because the quality of living, the quality of government, any prospect you've got for children simply aren't there. And aid in the form of, as I say, food and health is one thing, but that's not going to solve the problem of that country, and that's what actually has to be thought through. And until that is thought through, then it will just be sticking plaster. I have some sympathy, by the way, with the caller or the questioner who's come through and questioned priorities, because it is entirely correct that many people do question the priorities, not just of this government, but of the political decision-making that's been taking place over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And not just here, in other countries. Look at the same sort of situations that are arising in Europe, where the classic political parties are being swept aside. That's what's happened in the US. You can't remotely refer to this current, the Trump, as a classic Republican. Classic political parties have been swept away and others have come in because what it is that people are thinking and what it is that the politicians are doing are a long way apart. And until that starts to come back together, we will have bizarre outcomes, bizarre results, and we will have our own significant political turbulence, which didn't happen this time, but easily could have.
Al Pinkerton.
I had the privilege of being in Sudan in, I think, 2021 or 2022. I can't quite remember now, but it was extraordinary. Actually, I was there on an academic project because in my prior life I was a professor at Royal Holloway University, and I was working. Thank you. I was working on a project up in the northern Nubian desert, and we were actually trying to get to this area on the border between Egypt and Sudan that is arguably the last unclaimed place left on Earth, but we couldn't get there. And the reason we couldn't get there is because as we were travelling up through a dried out riverbed to get to this area, we came across the Wagner Group, and you will know, of course, who the Wagner Group are. They were at the time, because this was pre the toppling of Prigozhin. They were effectively a paramilitary unit working on behalf of Russia. But they were there in order to extract vast quantities of gold from the Nubian desert, but also to participate in the wider destabilization of Sudan as a country. So I agree with Angela. Sudan has been a deeply unstable country for a very long time, but not always because of indigenous actions, because it's been interfered with by countries externally. So Russia has sought to destabilize it. China has invested many billions supporting the government and seeking to extract what it wants out of Sudan. So Sudan finds itself torn apart, not just in a civil war, but geopolitically torn apart as well. And so I completely agree with what David Lammy is doing here to try and bring some kind of clarity to the future of Sudan. But because this is the world's largest humanitarian crisis in a generation, and will be, and already is, a displacement crisis that will eventually lap up on the shores of the UK. And this 120 million, in all honesty, is a drop in the ocean. This is nothing. This is like 4 red nose days. This is the kind of money that the British public could donate over the course of several weeks. So by comparison to the rest of government spending, it's really nothing at all. But I take the point of the original questioner, and that is that when you see so many things in our country going wrong, it's very easy to pull up the drawbridge and say, well, we don't want any money going overseas. The truth is, our country has been pretty badly governed for quite a long time, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also fulfil our international commitments.
But not obviously between 2010 and 2015.
That was a fine period, a fine vintage.
Should I be calling you Professor Al Pinkerton, not
No.
Doctor?
No, not at all. I'm currently a visiting professor at the university.
Oh, that's cheating. I'm a visiting professor too, so you can call me Professor if you want. But that's kind of cheating, isn't it? Right, we will take more of your questions in a moment. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. It's 8:31. Here's the news headlines with Darryl Jackson.
5 judges have ruled unanimously that the legal definition of a woman is based on biological sex. The Supreme Court's decision has been welcomed by women's rights campaigners, but trans activists say they're concerned about what it could mean. A man who shot and killed his mother, brother and sister will have his sentence reviewed due to concerns it was unduly lenient. 19-year-old Nicholas Prosper was jailed for at least 49 years, but the Shadow Justice Minister thinks it should be a whole life order. And California is suing the Trump administration, claiming the US president didn't have the authority to impose tariffs. The World Trade Organization says the import taxes could lead to the biggest financial slump since the height of the pandemic. LBC weather: outbreaks of rain across northwest Scotland tonight, patchy rain elsewhere, but generally dry in the south, a low of -1.
This is LBC. Finance. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
2034. It's 8:34. It's always confusing in the studio because they always use 24-hour clocks, and yet you can't really say it's 2034, which in Germany you would be able to. Rhonda, who asked the last question, says, "Thank you, Iain, for asking my question. It's the first time I've ever contacted LBC. I do enjoy your fair-mindedness and balance." Well, you can ask a question again, Rhonda, any time you like. Right. Our panel consists of Dr. Professor Al Pinkerton, Liberal Democrat MP for Surrey Heath, Angela Knight, former Conservative MP and Treasury Minister, Scarlett MccGwire, political commentator, former communications consultant to the Labour Party, and boy, do they need you back. They probably can't afford you with all the money that they haven't got.
Well, I was going to say, and all the money you pay me, Iain.
Well, indeed. And Max Anderson, Head of Communications for the Conservative Environment Network. Right, Imran in Reading asks a WhatsApp question. Why is there such a double standard amongst the majority of our mainstream media and political class when it comes to calling out Russian war crimes versus Israeli war crimes? Just look at the unanimous way in which everyone called out the Russian strike on Sumy at the weekend, particularly David Lammy. This is unheard of when it comes comes to calling out Israeli atrocities, where everything becomes very passive and indirect? Why are we so afraid of calling out Israel? Al Pinkerton.
I'm not, having sat in the House of Commons now for the past, 9 months, I don't recognise that characterisation in terms of what's said in the House of Commons. That's for sure. There's
what
very
about the media?
I mean, there is possibly some argument to be made there. But I also think that the circumstances are different. Israel, of course, was appallingly attacked. And has responded in ferocious measure, and I think does get widely criticised by elements of the Israeli media and the international media as a consequence. I think in the context of Russia and Ukraine, there's a very clear aggressor and a very clear victim in that particular conflict as well, and I think we do get quite a bit of coverage too on that. But I would also say that we get, I think, increasingly more limited coverage of that conflict too. So I think
which one?
Well, of Russia and Ukraine.
Who?
I feel at the moment there's very limited coverage.
'Cause surely part of the argument here has to be about the access that the media have to Gaza, which is none. So if a television station doesn't have pictures, they might be able to get some through different means, but there are no journalists in Gaza, or very, very few, and therefore it is more difficult to cover.
I think that's undoubtedly right in terms of the way that formal journalism is done. I mean, clearly there's also other kinds of sources that get discussed and debated, and I'm sure that there are some news agencies that just don't quite know whether particular footage that they're seeing is verifiable or not. I mean, clearly there is, in relative terms, more access to the Ukrainian front line. But I think also the wider geopolitics of the Russia-Ukraine conflict it perhaps elevates that particular conflict to a wider global level, because Russia is, of course, of such strategic concern to the UK and is indeed prompting increasing defence spending, for example.
Max Anderson.
Well, I think the reason is quite clear, is that if I want to say something on Russia and Ukraine, it's usually quite simplistic. The British public their opinion is very much in favour of supporting and defending Ukraine. While on the flip side, if someone wants to try and talk about, even if they're just covering the news from a certain perspective, Israel-Gaza, the public is not only much more split, but I also think it is incredibly more complicated for all the reasons that Al said. So I think the reason why is because people in the British media feel far more comfortable condemning Russia and don't feel like they're going to get the same backlash, while when it comes to Israel and Gaza, I think trying to discuss this topic requires incredible nuance, and you can't just condone one way or another, because I think it requires quite a long explanation as to why you're saying one thing or another.
Scarlett?
Yeah, I basically agree. I think there's incredible pressure on broadcasters to try and be objective about what's happening in Gaza and make sure that in every single case that there is an Israeli defence voice in it, even if you're talking about things that have gone terribly wrong and people have been killed. Whereas, we don't worry about a Russian voice, a pro-Russian voice at all when we're doing Ukraine. But what's interesting is that actually that the board of deputies, the board of Jewish deputies, who are very, very senior, I mean, they're representatives of all the synagogues in Britain, have come out today criticising Israel for what they're doing in Gaza. Now, about 15 months ago, I was talking, the president, the then president, it's changed, went on television and radio one Sunday to call for a ceasefire when, frankly, Labour and the Conservative parties were in an absolute mess about what to do. And she said, we need to have a ceasefire, we need to stop the killing. But they've gone much further today and actually condemned Israel for what they're doing in Gaza. And so it's absolutely right. No journalists are allowed into Gaza. The journalists who are in Gaza are Gazans, and many of them have been killed. And they are sending what pictures out. But I think it's very, very interesting that an august body like the Board of Deputies have come out very loudly and said, stop it. This is enough. They've said they're ripping the heart out of Israel. I mean, they feel very, very strongly that they are pro-Israeli and they feel that Israel is doing wrong and is ruining their country. And I think that's incredibly important.
Angela?
Interesting question that, the one gets more coverage than the other. I hadn't thought that. I must say I thought that to me, the Israel-Gaza conflict has just remained pretty constantly in the news. Totally take the point that you can't necessarily get journalists in there, but that hasn't stopped coverage. It hasn't stopped comment. It hasn't stopped the fact that, as you said, Max, it's quite a divisive topic in this country, and people have taken sides. So I don't think it is removed from the news at all. Interesting the point about deputies, because there does need to be a resolution. There was a horrific attack on Israel, but there does now need to be some form of a resolution. What I think with the Russia versus Ukraine, though, is we are in a different situation. I mean, there's a peace deal there on the table. I mean, for all his bully boy tactics, Trump did bully poor old Zelensky into agreeing a peace treaty, one in which the Ukrainians will have to pay for. It's sitting with Putin, and all Putin is doing and Russia is doing is continuing to attack. So we have got two very different situations here. Long may we continue to cover them properly in the UK. A couple of weeks ago, and I was in the US. And you look at US television, almost doesn't matter which channel you look at. Their coverage of anything international is small. Their coverage actually of internal issues is brief. It has no depth to it. And I think that is actually quite appalling that here you've got the biggest democracy of the Western world, the great economic powerhouse, and they don't do anything on their television programs on what really is going on in the world, and they don't really do it on what is happening more than 25 miles down the road.
I think the problem that the media has had over Russia-Ukraine is that it's gone in cycles. I mean, there have been weeks or many successive weeks where not really much has happened. And then people say, well, why aren't you covering Russia and Ukraine? We said, well, we're a news station. We cover what's in the news. But I remember on several occasions, we did do hours on Ukraine just to keep it in the news, even though there wasn't a lot going on, because it is important that people still realise that it's all happening.
It is important. It is an invasion of a country which does not want to be part of the Soviet Union or the Russian bloc anymore.
And it's very important to remember, as the Americans seem to have forgotten, that Zelensky doesn't feel he's just protecting Ukraine. He feels he's fighting on behalf of Europe against Putin, and he feels that Ukraine is the front line, and that actually we're not helping him, we're helping ourselves.
And if you speak to Poland, for example, they would agree with that.
Precisely.
If you go and visit Estonia, they would wholeheartedly agree with that. There is a very real concern that this is step one. It's not just about Ukraine. And, of course, Putin has been very, very clear that he did not agree with the breakup of the Soviet Union. He does believe in Greater Russia. And I think it's probably true that he thought that this was going to be an easy one to swallow.
Well, these may be very important subjects, but we have the most important subject of the day coming up. An oak tree has been cut down in Enfield. More on that in just a moment here on LBC. It's 7:45.
This is LBC.
100.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:47. I think I said it was 7:45 a couple of minutes ago. In case you think I'd reverted to Greenwich Mean Time, I haven't. Right, on our panel we have Dr. Al Pinkerton, Angela Knight, Scarlett MccGwire and Max Anderson. Sally in Barnet wants to know this. After the Toby Carvery cut down a famous old oak tree in Enfield, is this country just too relaxed about our natural environment being destroyed? We're happy to let all our water get polluted too. Are we? Well, let me give you the background to this. For those of you outside of Enfield who are interested in this, Toby Carvery owner Mitchells and Butlers has admitted ordering the cutting down of a more than 400-year-old oak tree in Whitewebbs Park in Enfield, but says experts told it that the tree posed a potential health and safety risk. Enfield Council says it's treating the matter as criminal damage and intends to get the police involved. Max Anderson, you are head of communications for the Conservative Environment Network. On a scale of 1 to 10, how appalled are you?
I think about a 2. I'm not really that appalled by it. I knew you were going to come to me first from the moment you brought this up. Look, from what I can see, from the statements that the companies put out, is they did their assessment. They said there was a threat to not only their staff, but to customers. So it makes sense that they've done what they've had to do. I think this is massively taken out of proportion compared to what, other really important environmental topics that we could be talking about. So I think on a scale of 1 to 10, how outraged I am, can I choose -5 at this point?
Well, I'm very disappointed. Scarlett?
Actually, I am outraged. I really mind when people do things like that. I really minded about the tree being cut down in
But if it's true that it is a health and safety risk.
And there's another report that says that it had another couple of 100 years left in it. I think that when we cut down a tree that is 500 years old, you want to do more than not tell anybody, get it, and then do. I mean, I think it's terrible, actually. I do think that we have very, very little old woodland left and we need to preserve it. I actually don't agree with your caller or texter. I think we do mind about these things, which is why it's been in the news non-stop. And we definitely mind, and nothing I feel really strongly about is sewage. And I think the water companies are
Don't
appalling.
get the Lib Dems started on that. we'll never hear the end of it.
I agree with Scarlett, actually, that I think what this story does show, in the fact that we're still talking about it at 10 to 9 at night on the day that this happened, or maybe even several weeks after it happened, shows that British people do really care about trees, particularly these kind of statement trees. We did care a lot about the sycamore gap tree. I think people do really worship and celebrate the ancient woodland that we have. I mean, I heard this morning on this very station that this tree was apparently the ecosystem that supports thousands of microorganisms and various other things. So it's more than just the tree. It's what that tree provides for the local woodland environment. It's a shame to see that tree looking quite so nude and skeletal as it does now. But I think it's a great thing, actually, that we take such care of our trees. And there was recently a report, I think, that mapped all of the ancient trees that now exist outside of woodland in the UK. And the fact that we're a country that produces maps like that, I'm a geographer, the fact that we produce maps that show isolated ancient trees is a fantastic thing. They should be celebrated.
It keeps you in work.
It certainly does. And long may it continue.
Angela.
Well, let's see. Do I think that it's nice to have woodlands and trees and all that sort of thing? Yes, of course I do. It's really good. It's lovely to have an old tree. I've got a couple and they're really, really nice. So I'm all in favour of trees. But am I in favour of a tree that's dead? Should it just be left there? I mean, I haven't seen the picture of this. I didn't see the picture of it before it was cut down. I don't think it was
dead, was it?
I haven't seen the picture of it afterward. But what I heard this morning when I turned on the news was that it was they cut it down because they'd been told it was dead. Well, if that's wrong, then somebody's given a completely wrong steer here. If it wasn't dead, but it was a bit sick, then they should have done something about it. But I'm afraid I haven't seen the report that they've got or whatever. But, by all means support trees. By all means be in favour of trees. At the same time, if you've got something that's dying on you, you've got to be allowed to chop it down. So
one of our
let
listeners,
me know whether it was dead or not.
One of our listeners is coming up with ideas for Ed Davies' next publicity stunt. So
yes.
if you'd like to pass
Let me
this
get my
back
pen.
on.
Yeah, that's right. He's going to plant a
Tyler,
big tree.
who says Ed Davey to sit up a tree for 3 days to prove his green credentials. I think we could all agree we'd like to cut that one down. And he also suggests the next Lib Dem publicity stunt will be Ed Davey jumping in a cesspit tank to make the point about, well, I can't say this word, dirty rivers or something.
I don't think it says
we'd all
dirty
pay good money
rivers.
to see that.
I will take both of those suggestions back to Lib Dem HQ.
Fantastic. That's all that we expect. You're going to hate me now, Scarlett, because I actually own shares in a company that supplies forestry machinery, so they could have supplied the things that chop this tree down.
I don't blame the people who... I don't
make
blame the
myself
people who
popular.
did. I blame the people who
Okay.
said chop it down. And I
Right.
think Max, as an environmental person...
You're a
you used to
disgrace.
say, minus
What can I
5.
say?
Honestly, Tory environmentalists.
Right, let's go to
I've got to
Dean.
come back on that.
Don't pick on poor old Max.
Let's go.
That's not fair.
Let's go. Hang on. Let's go to the next question. Dean is in Gloucester. He says, should government ministers still be planning to go to China? The Lib Dem leader, Sir Ed Davies, says the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, should cancel plans to make an official visit to China after Chinese-backed authorities in Hong Kong prevented Lib Dem MP Vera Hobhouse from making a family visit to the region last weekend. Angela.
I don't think we should stop visiting China, no, but I do find this a really, really weird situation in which, perfectly legitimate MPs, and this isn't the first time, have gone to China and they get turned back at the border. There's an element of tit for tat here, which I think would be a good idea. There's certainly, they need to pull in the Chinese ambassador and sort this out. What you can't do is have a situation in which legitimate people are turned away simply because they've expressed a view that is not in keeping with whatever may be the mantra of the country at the time. What I would hope is that when a minister goes to China, that they actually make publicly those statements. Don't just go and pretend it hasn't happened or it's got to be dealt with quietly under the table or whatever. There is an element of very real need to have a relationship with China. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you have to kowtow. It doesn't mean that you have to accept what they've done. It doesn't mean that you somehow shouldn't say what your view is, which is, frankly, this must stop and cease taking place.
Did you know that phrase kowtow actually comes
Yes,
from
I did.
China?
Yes, I did.
Do you know how it arose?
I thought it was something to do with the way that they had the hair, and you pulled their hair when you bowed.
That's not the explanation Tessa Dunlop gave on the Politics Meets History podcast.
Oh, right.
last week.
Tell me then.
I can't remember. I know it wasn't that.
You listen to your podcast so well, Ian.
Well, I can't remember everything that appears on a podcast. Scarlett.
No, I think I mostly agree with Angela. I think we have to go on dealing with China. I mean, what I don't understand is why we should stop going to China because of Vera Hobhouse, but still deal with Israel when they actually kept out 2 MPs because of what they said. I don't understand why there's this difference, apart from Kemi Badenoch saying that one is a democracy and the other isn't. I mean, it either works both ways or not. But as far as China goes, we have to keep up relations at the moment, and be very tough about human rights. And actually, the government has said that they will challenge China, cooperate with China, and compete with China, but they certainly intend to have a relationship.
Max.
I think, yes, business secretary should go out to China, but what I think is increasingly frustrating is it doesn't seem like the government really understands the threat that China posed to this country and feels very, very happy to continue to ingrain our further and deeper relationships with China. Yes, incredibly important we maintain a relationship, but at the same time, we have critical infrastructure. We're importing very, very important materials for our energy supply, for defence, continuously from China. And are perfectly okay with that and not actually taking any other steps to fix those problems. So yes, we can still, work with China, but we have to recognise the world is changing. We have to recognise that, and as we've seen with China's relationship with America, they're more than happy to stop critical minerals coming to a country when needed. And that is incredibly dangerous. And I think it is disappointing that, yes, you can still go out and visit China and have discussions, but come on, let's be realistic about the situation we are in, and let's try and be a little bit tougher and do a little bit more.
Al?
Yeah, and I think what Davey has called for is a little bit of that toughness. I mean, nobody is denying that China isn't a hugely important country. It's vastly important in terms of foreign direct investment into the UK. But there's a really chilling effect when MPs who are literally just doing their jobs and asking critical questions in Parliament are prevented from going to see their grandson who happens to live in Hong Kong. There are some MPs who undoubtedly know that they are sanctioned by the Chinese state. Ian Duncan-Smith said that in the chamber on Saturday. Vera Hophouse is not in that category. She turned up thinking that she'd get through the airport only to be given some incredibly rough questioning and then put on the next aeroplane home. And I think what Ed Davey is calling for is just a little bit of that toughness to say, let's not deal with this country entirely normally until they explain themselves.
And let's do a bit about pulling back some of our extended supply chains as well. As Max says, we're hugely dependent on so many areas of stuff coming in for China. We do need to think about what should be within, even closer to home, as well as within our own jurisdiction.
And with our allies as well. It's not just about, producing stuff in the UK, because we can't do that. But
as I said, closer to home, yeah.
Right, let's move on to our final question. It's called Fun Question. Not sure how funny it is, but Tara is in Cheshire. A pair of climbers have broken a sporting record. Oh, this is what I thought it was going to be. Right. Anyway, a pair of climbers have broken a sporting record for the fastest time to climb up 3 huge mountains in Switzerland back to back. Wow. Which sporting achievement would you like to brag about? Now, that's a good one. I like that one. Scarlett.
When I was at school, we had a surf life-saving association that you had to swim out and pull somebody back. And I was the only person who managed to fail it twice. And they said the person would have drowned by the time I got out there.
That's not funny.
No, it's not funny at all. It was absolutely humiliating because I was really trying very hard.
The lesson we're all learning is never go on a beach holiday. Max Anderson.
So I've got a boring answer, which is I ran the London Marathon last year. That's the boring answer. Probably the other one is only about 4 weeks ago, I was playing at Twickenham Stadium and I dislocated my shoulder at Twickenham Stadium. So how many people can say they've dislocated their shoulder?
That's a good one. Angela?
Well, I still ski and I have 2 sons. They're quite old, my sons. They're probably older than you, Max, and they ski. And we went out and skied together. This was last season. And I'm at the back, but I'm still only about 30 seconds behind them. And I think that's not bad.
Good.
Not bad.
Very good. Al?
I'm going to dip back to my school days. So we used to be a curler. Back at school up in Edinburgh, and we got to the final of the Scottish Schools Curling Championship,
fantastic.
And that's just about the greatest sporting achievement
But you lost.
of our life. But we lost to Lockerbie, who were renowned as being the kings of curling at the time. But I got into the final nonetheless.
You weren't beaten by the girl team then?
Not by the girl team.
So basically, none of you have won the Medway Ports Authority Golf Championship.
Which you
unlike
have.
me.
Oh, congratulations.
But
I don't play golf.
I was running a public affairs company at the time, and they were one of our clients. And of course, you should never beat your client at anything. And I did get 15 not out for Ashton Villa Cricket Club too. So
Fabulous.
I think that's quite good.
Well done.
Anyway, thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, no cross question on Monday, but mainly because I'm not here. But on Tuesday, it's World Earth Day, and in fact, we should have invited you on Tuesday.
I can come back on if you
But
want.
given your environmental record, I'm not sure. Anyway, we're going to be joined by the Green Party co-leader, Adrian Ramsey, by Reform UK Deputy Leader and Anti-Net Zero Policies campaigner, Richard Tice, and 2 others. Not quite sure who they're going to be yet, but they will be here on Tuesday. Right, coming up in the next hour, Britain's largest teaching union, the NAEU, has sparked fears for for Jewish pupils after vowing to produce school resources to raise awareness of the situation in Palestine. Now, that provokes a number of questions, I suppose. Should a left-wing education union be producing material for schools on the vexed issue of Israel and Palestine? Be interested to hear your views on that. But also, how should parents seek to talk to their children about difficult and possibly traumatising events like the conflict in Gaza? Or is it better left to the children's teachers to do that? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the author J.K. Rowling says